It was in the raw and windless December of 1888, in that stretch of the year when London seems to hold its breath beneath a ceiling of low gray cloud, that my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes was drawn into one of the most singular investigations of his career. I have set down many of his cases over the years, some for their brilliance of reasoning, others for the peculiarity of their circumstances, but I confess that I have hesitated long before committing this one to paper. It touches upon matters of the heart which are not easily reduced to the cold syllogisms of logic, and it involved persons whose grief I had no wish to expose to the idle curiosity of the public. Now that a decent interval has passed, and those most concerned have gone to their rest, I feel at liberty at last to record the affair of the Observatory upon the Kentish Downs. The morning it began was one of profound stillness. A hard frost had settled over Baker Street in the night, silvering the panes and stiffening the horse blankets of the cabs that waited, steaming faintly along the curb. I had risen late, for my practice was light in that season, and I found Holmes already at the breakfast table, though he had eaten nothing. He sat with his dressing gown drawn about him, and his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, staring into the fire with that particular expression of caged restlessness which I had come to know, and frankly, to dread. For 3 weeks London had offered him nothing but a forged check and a missing spaniel, and I could see that the great engine of his mind was beginning to turn upon itself for want of proper fuel. "You are wondering, Watson," said he, without turning his head, "whether I shall take up the violin or the needle before luncheon. I assure you the question has occupied me as well." "I was wondering nothing of the kind," said I, though in truth the thought of the little Morocco case had crossed my mind with some anxiety. "I was reading of the frost. They say the Serpentine is bearing already." "The frost," he repeated. "Yes. It is a great preserver, the cold. It halts decay, it fixes the moment, it renders the perishable permanent. A body left in this weather will tell a very different tale from one left in July." He said it idly, as a man might remark upon the price of coal, but I have since thought there was something almost prophetic in it, for we had not been at the table above 10 minutes when Mrs. Hudson brought up a telegram. Holmes tore it open, read it, and passed it to me with a flick of his wrist. His whole aspect had altered in an instant. The languor had fallen from him like a discarded cloak, and his gray eyes had taken on the keen and hungry light of a hound that has caught the scent. The telegram read, "Body discovered in disused observatory, Fenwick Hall near Ashdown. Circumstances impossible. Local force baffled. Beg you come at once. Reward no object. Sir Marcus Thorne." "Impossible," said Holmes, rubbing his hands together. "I have learned to distrust that word, Watson. In my experience, the impossible is merely the improbable observed by a lazy eye. And yet a man does not spend the price of a telegram upon hyperbole unless he is genuinely frightened. There is a train from Charing Cross at 11. Be so good as to consult your Bradshaw and bring your revolver. December on the Downs is a cold business, and I have a fancy this one may be colder still." I knew better than to press him with questions, for he had none of the facts and detested speculation in advance of data. Within the hour we were rattling southward through a landscape locked in white, the hop poles standing like regiments of bare crosses in the fields, and the smoke of distant farmhouses rising straight up into the motionless air. Holmes spoke little. He sat wrapped in his ear-flapped traveling cap with a sheaf of newspapers upon his knee, but I observed that he read the same column 3 times without turning the page, and I knew that his mind was already at work upon the scanty material the telegram had furnished. At Ashdown we were met upon the platform by a tall, spare gentleman of perhaps 55, dressed in morning black, whose face bore the marks of a recent and terrible shock. His hair was iron gray, cropped close, and his mustache was clipped in the military fashion, but for all his upright carriage there was a tremor in the hand he extended to us, and his eyes, deep-set and haunted, moved restlessly from Holmes to myself and back again. "Mr. Holmes, thank God you have come. I am Marcus Thorne. My carriage is waiting. I will tell you everything upon the road, for I cannot bear to remain in this place a moment longer than I must." The carriage was a good one, close and well sprung, and as it bore us out of the little town and up onto the rolling white shoulders of the downs, Sir Marcus began his account. Holmes leaned back with his eyes half closed, his fingertips together, in the attitude of one who wishes to absorb rather than interrogate. "You must understand, gentlemen," said our host, "that I am a plain man, or was until 3 days ago. I made my fortune in shipping, the India trade chiefly, and I bought Fenwick Hall 11 years since, when I retired from active business. It is an old house, parts of it Jacobean, and it came with a curious appendage, an observatory built upon the crown of the hill some quarter-mile from the house, by the previous owner, a Colonel Fenwick who was mad on astronomy. A round tower of brick and stone, with a copper dome that turns or turned, for the mechanism has been broken these several years. When the colonel died, the place fell into disuse. I never had the least interest in the stars, and my late wife found the tower cheerless, so we let it stand empty. The path to it grew over. The door was kept locked, and there was but one key, which hung in my study upon a board with the others." "One key only," murmured Holmes. "You are certain?" "I am now, Mr. Holmes, more certain than I could wish. But let me proceed in order. The dead man was my nephew, Julian Thorne, my late brother's only son. He was 26, and he had been my ward since he was a boy of 9. I brought him up, educated him, and had intended to make him my heir, for I have no children living. My son died of the scarlet fever at the age of 7, and my wife followed him to the grave 5 years ago. Julian was all the family remaining to me." His voice broke a little upon the words, and he was silent for a moment, mastering himself. Holmes waited with that grave courtesy which he could always summon toward genuine distress, however impatient he might be with affectation. "Julian was a clever lad," Sir Marcus resumed, "clever and charming, though I will not pretend to you he was without faults. He had a taste for expensive things, and little inclination to earn them. There had been debts, I paid them. There had been quarrels, we were reconciled. Latterly he had grown quieter, more thoughtful, and I had begun to hope that he was settling into steadier ways. He spoke of marriage. There is a young lady in the neighborhood, a Miss Eleanor Vane, the daughter of my nearest gentleman neighbor, and I believe there was an understanding between them, though nothing had been formally announced." "When did you last see your nephew alive?" Holmes asked. "On Tuesday evening at dinner. He was in good spirits, better, I thought, than he had been for some time. He retired to his room, as he said, to write letters. That was the last I saw of him. On Wednesday morning he did not come down to breakfast, but that was not unusual. He kept late hours and rose late. It was not until the afternoon, when his man went to rouse him and found the bed had not been slept in, that any alarm was raised. We searched the house and grounds. It was old Gregory, my gardener, who thought of the observatory. The path was trodden, footprints in the frost, going up. And when we forced it, said Holmes sharply. The door was locked then. Locked, Mr. Holmes, from the inside. The great key was in the lock, turned upon the inner side. There is no other way in. The windows are mere slits, such as you find in an old keep, far too narrow for any man to pass. The dome above does not open, the shutter is rusted fast, has been for years. We broke the lock with a crowbar, 3 of us together, and inside we found my nephew lying dead upon the stone floor beneath the great telescope, and no living soul beside him. And the cause of death. There was a wound upon the back of his head. Dr. Pyecroft, who attended, says it might have been a fall, There is a short iron stair to the observing platform, and he might have struck his head upon the edge of the stone dais. But Mr. Holmes, and here the old man leaned forward, his knuckles white upon the head of his cane. If it were a mere fall, why did he lock himself in? And how, in the name of God, did he come to be there at all? He had never once entered that tower in the 11 years we had lived at the Hall. He thought it a dreary place and said so. Why should he go there at night, in the killing cold, lock the door behind him and die? Holmes said nothing for a while. The carriage swayed and creaked over the frozen ruts, and I watched my friend's face, which had settled into the impassive mask that meant his whole attention was engaged. "You spoke of a reward," said he at last, "and of impossibility. I must tell you plainly, Sir Marcus, that I do not investigate for rewards, and that I do not believe in the impossible. If your nephew died within a locked room, then either he was alone when he died, or the room was not so sealed as it appears, or the door was not locked at the time you suppose. There is no fourth alternative. Which of these is true, I hope to discover before this day is out. But I must ask you one question, and I beg you to answer it honestly, however painful. Had your nephew any enemies? Any reason to fear for his life, or to take it?" Sir Marcus hesitated. It was the smallest of hesitations, but Holmes marked it. I saw the flicker of his eyelid. "He was young and careless," said Sir Marcus slowly. "Such young men make enemies without knowing it. But of anyone who would do him harm, no. I know of no one. And self-destruction. At Julian." The old man almost laughed, a dry and mirthless sound. "No, Mr. Holmes. Julian loved his life too well. He was the last man in England to make away with himself. We came in sight of Fenwick Hall as the short afternoon was already graying toward its close. It was a long, low house of weathered brick, its many gables etched sharp against the pale sky, with a plume of smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. But it was not the house that drew the eye. It was the tower that stood beyond it, upon the very crown of the hill. A round, grim column of dark stone crowned with a dome of green-stained copper, stark and solitary against the immensity of the winter heavens. There was something melancholy in it, something that spoke of a mind turned always upward and away from the concerns of men, and I do not wonder that the dead man's uncle could not bear to look at it. Even in the failing light, it seemed to me to brood over the valley like a thing that kept a secret. "We will go directly to the tower," said Holmes, "while the light lasts. The body has not been moved. It lies where we found it, Doctor." Pyecroft advised against disturbing it until the inquest, and the local inspector, Inspector Bramwell of the county force, agreed. "He is there now, I believe." We left the carriage at the house and walked up the trodden path through the snow. Holmes went first, moving slowly, his eyes upon the ground, and twice he stopped and crouched to examine the frozen surface, waving us back with an impatient hand when we drew too near. The path had been much trampled by the searchers, but Holmes seemed to find something to interest him nonetheless. "You will observe, Watson," he said quietly, "that the ground rose after Tuesday's snow but before the searchers came. There was a light fall Tuesday night, see, here at the edge, under the shelter of the wall where the searchers have not trodden. The snow lies smooth. And here he pointed with his stick, a single line of prints going up, older than the rest, half filled with the later fall. One man walking steadily, not hurrying. And no prints returning, curious. Most curious. At the door of the tower, a burly, red-faced man in a heavy ulster was stamping his feet against the cold. This was Inspector Bramwell, a solid, honest officer of the sort who does his duty faithfully within the bounds of his imagination, and is bewildered by anything that exceeds them. He greeted Holmes with a mixture of relief and professional wariness. "Glad of any help, Mr. Holmes, I'm sure, though I don't mind telling you I've never seen the like. It's a bad business, and no way to make sense of it. Door locked on the inside, key in the lock, and the poor young gentleman dead on the floor. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd not have believed it. You broke the door yourself. I did not. It was broken before I came by Sir Marcus and his men. But I examined the lock. It's a great old iron thing, and the key was turned full home on the inside. There's no picking it and no reaching it from without. The door's 4 inches of oak, and there's no gap to speak of. The interior of the observatory was a single circular chamber, perhaps 30 feet across, its walls of bare stone rising to the shadowy vault of the dome. In the center, upon a raised stone dais reached by a short iron stair of 4 or 5 steps, stood the great telescope, a mighty brass instrument pointing uselessly at the frozen shutter above. Dust lay thick upon everything, upon the floor, upon the disused instruments ranged along the walls, upon the little writing desk that stood beneath one of the slit windows. The cold within was, if anything, more bitter than without, for the stone held it like a tomb. Julian Thorne lay at the foot of the iron stair, upon his back, one arm flung out, his handsome young face composed as if in sleep. He had been a fine-looking fellow, dark-haired, well-made, dressed for the evening in a dark suit with a light overcoat thrown over it. Beneath his head, the stone was dark with a stain that the cold had frozen hard. Holmes stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the whole scene before he advanced a single step. Then he began his examination, and I have seldom seen him more thorough. He moved about the chamber with the noiseless intensity of a cat, his lens in his hand, pausing here and there, murmuring to himself. He spent a long while over the floor, and longer still over the body, and I saw him bend very close over the dead man's hands, and lift and examine the soles of his boots, and peer into his open mouth and the folds of his clothing. He examined the iron stair with minute care, running his fingers along the edge of each step. He crossed to the little writing desk and stood over it a long time. He returned to the door and studied the lock, the key, and the ground of dust before the threshold. At length he straightened, and there was a look upon his face that I knew well, the look of a man who has seen much and understood something, but not yet all. "Inspector," said he, "I congratulate you upon one thing at least. You have not permitted the scene to be disturbed. That is more than I can usually say. Now a few questions. The overcoat the dead man wears. Is it his own?" Bramwell blinked. "Why, I suppose so. Whose else would it be?" "That is precisely what I wish to know. Sir Marcus, will you look? Was this your nephew's coat?" Sir Marcus, who had remained near the door, pale and unwilling, forced himself to approach and look down at the garment. Yes. That is Julian's gray overcoat. He wore it often." Thank you. And now, Watson, since we are both medical men, though I have but a smattering to your training, I should value your opinion upon that wound." He drew me aside, and we bent together over the body. The wound was upon the back of the skull, a single deep contusion with a broken skin from which the blood had flowed. I examined it as well as the frozen condition of the remains permitted. "A heavy blow," I said, "or a heavy fall. It is consistent with striking the head against the edge of one of these iron steps. You see the corner is sharp. The position of the body would fit such a fall if he had descended the stair and slipped. And the direction of the wound. Upon the back and slightly to the left of the crown, so that a man falling backward down the stair, or struck from behind and above, might sustain it. But not, I think, a man falling forward. No. He must have gone over backward." "That is a point of some interest," said Holmes. "For observe, the body lies at the foot of the stair with the head toward the steps and the feet away from them. If he fell backward from the stair, he would come to rest with his head away from the steps and his feet toward them. He is lying, Watson, in the wrong direction." I looked and saw that it was so, though I should never have thought of it. The dead man's feet pointed toward the door. His head, with its terrible wound, lay nearest the iron stair. "He was moved then," I said. "He was moved," Holmes agreed quietly, "or he did not die where or how it appears. Either way, the fall down the stair is a fiction. Say nothing of this yet." He raised his voice. "Inspector, has the desk been examined? There are papers here." Upon the little writing desk beneath the window lay a few sheets of paper, an inkstand frozen solid, and a pen. Holmes gathered the papers with care. The uppermost was a half-written letter in a careless, sprawling hand, and Holmes read it aloud in the failing light. "My dear E. I can bear this suspense no longer. What you told me on Sunday has changed everything, and I must know the truth before I can act. Meet me tonight at the old tower. I have the key, and we shall not be disturbed. Come at 11, and for God's sake tell no one. I have discovered something that concerns us both more nearly than you can imagine, and if I am right, then—" There the letter broke off. "It is Julian's hand," said Sir Marcus in a low voice. "I know it well." "My dear E," repeated Holmes thoughtfully. "Miss Eleanor Vane, one presumes. He appointed a meeting here at 11 o'clock on the night he died. And yet the letter is unfinished and unsent. It lies here upon the desk. Was it written here in this room or brought here? The ink is frozen. I cannot tell how long it has stood. Sir Marcus, your nephew took the key from your study. When did you last see it upon its board? I could not say with certainty. I do not go to that board from 1 month's end to another. It might have hung there Tuesday morning. I cannot swear to it." Holmes folded the letter and placed it within his pocketbook. He took a last, slow survey of the chamber, his eyes traveling from the frozen shutter of the dome down to the dust of the floor, and I saw them narrow suddenly and fix upon something near the base of the wall, opposite the door. He crossed the room and knelt. From the shadow at the foot of the wall he lifted, upon the tip of his finger, some small object which he studied through his lens for a long time in silence. "What is it, Holmes?" "A woman's glove button," said he. "Small of jet, of the kind used upon an evening glove. It lies here in the dust, some 15 feet from the body." He turned it in the light. "And it is not dusty, Watson. Everything else in this room is thick with the dust of years. This button is clean. It has lain here a very short time, a matter of days, no more." He rose, his face grave. "Someone else was in this room, a woman. And recently." Sir Marcus had gone very white. "Mr. Holmes, you cannot mean Miss Vane is a gentlewoman of the most spotless character." "I mean nothing yet, Sir Marcus, except that the evidence must be gathered before it is interpreted. Inspector, I should be obliged if the body were now removed to the house and given into Dr. Watson's charge for a more careful examination, with Dr. Pyecroft's leave. And I should like the door of this tower kept locked and the key given to me. I shall wish to return in daylight. For the present, I have seen what this room has to tell me by candle, and it is a good deal, though not yet enough." We walked back down the hill in the deep blue dusk. The first stars were pricking out over the downs. Those same stars, I reflected, that the old colonel had loved and that now looked down so coldly upon the strange business their tower had housed. Holmes walked in silence, his chin sunk upon his breast, and I forbore to disturb him. That evening at the hall, I made such examination of the body as I could. Dr. Pyecroft, the local practitioner, a nervous, elderly man much overawed by the eminence of his temporary colleague, assisted me and confirmed my findings. The single wound to the back of the head was the certain cause of death. There were no other marks of violence, save a slight bruise upon the right forearm, such as a man might receive in warding off a blow or in gripping something tightly. The dead man had been in good health. His last meal had been taken some hours before death. And here I made a discovery which, when I reported it to Holmes, caused him to sit up sharply in his chair. "The frost, Holmes," I said. "It confounds the usual signs, but as near as I can judge, this man has been dead longer than we were told. The body was found Wednesday afternoon, and is supposed to have died late Tuesday night. But the degree of the changes I observe, allowing for the extreme cold, suggests to me that death occurred not on Tuesday night at all, but very possibly on Monday. A full day earlier." Holmes was silent for a moment. "Monday," he repeated softly. "But he dined with his uncle on Tuesday evening. He was seen alive on Tuesday. Then either I am mistaken, or the man his uncle dined with on Tuesday was not the man who lies dead in the tower," said Holmes. He rose and paced the length of the room. "Watson, this is deep water. Consider what we have. A man supposed to have died on Tuesday night, but who by your reckoning may have died on Monday. A letter appointing a meeting for 11 o'clock, unfinished and unsent. A body lying in the wrong direction for the death it is supposed to have suffered. A woman's clean button in a room thick with dust. And a single track of footprints going up to the tower, one man and none returning. There is a design here, Watson, and it is a subtle one. Someone has taken great pains to make us believe a particular story. Our task is to discover why the true story required so elaborate a disguise. I confess I was utterly at sea. But if Julian did not die on Tuesday, who dined with his uncle? That, among other things, is what we must learn. Tell me, did you observe the dead man's hands?" "I noticed nothing remarkable. There was ink upon the fingers of the right hand, the first and second fingers, stained as a man's are who has been writing. That is consistent with the letter upon the desk. But there was also, beneath the nails, a quantity of a fine, dark, greasy matter, which I have taken the liberty of scraping into an envelope for later analysis. And the soles of his boots, Watson, they bore traces of a reddish clay quite unlike the chalk and flint of these downs. Wherever that clay is to be found, it is not upon this estate. He had walked shortly before his death, upon ground of a very different character. These are small things. But it is upon small things, as you know, that the whole edifice of a case may be made to stand or fall. The next morning broke clear and hard, with a sun that gave light but little warmth. Holmes was abroad early. I found him already at the tower when I climbed the hill after breakfast. In the daylight, the chamber told a different tale, and Holmes had been at work upon it for above an hour. He had swept the dust from a wide area of the floor, and was down upon his hands and knees over it with his lens. "Come in, Watson, and mind where you tread. There is a great deal to be read here now the light is good. Look." He pointed to the floor. "The dust of years, undisturbed but for what we ourselves and the searchers have made. But here a broad, faint disturbance, as of something dragged. It leads from the door toward the foot of the stair, where the body lay. And here, at either side of the drag, the faint prints of a man's boots, a man walking backward, drawing a weight after him. Then the body was dragged to the stair after death. So it would appear. Now come to the door." He led me to the threshold. "The lock. I have taken it to pieces this morning. Observe." He held up the great iron lock, which he had removed from the shattered door and laid upon a cloth. "It is old and worn, and the wards are loose. And here, upon the barrel of the key and upon the inner mechanism, are fresh scratches, very fine, made by some slender instrument. Watson, this door was locked from the outside. But you told Sir Marcus that was impossible. The key was in the lock on the inside. I told him nothing of the kind. I told him that either it was so, or the room was not sealed, or the door was not locked when he supposed. This is the answer. There is an old trick, known to a certain class of criminal, and to more than one locksmith, by which a key left in a lock upon the inner side may be turned from the outer side, provided the wards are worn and there is play in the mechanism. A pair of fine pincers, or even a length of stout wire and a loop of thread, passed through the gap beneath the door and about the bow of the key, will do it, given patience. It leaves precisely these scratches. Our murderer arranged the body, placed the key in the lock upon the inside, closed the door, and turned the key from without. He created his impossible room deliberately, that we might waste our energies upon a marvel and overlook the man. Then it is murder beyond doubt. It has been murder beyond doubt, since we saw that the body lay in the wrong direction. The locked door was never the true problem, Watson. It was the answer the murderer wished us to become absorbed in. The true problems are these: who died, when, why, and how the whole of it was made to appear a thing it was not. He rose and dusted his knees. And now I think it is time we made the acquaintance of the neighborhood. There is a Miss Alina Vane to whom, it seems, the dead man wrote his last letter. And there is the household of the Hall, every member of which I mean to know before the day is out. Human beings, Watson, are the most instructive of all documents, if one knows how to read them. We began with the household. The steward, a grave and elderly man named Hollies, who had served the family since Sir Marcus first came to the Hall. The dead man's own manservant, a pale young fellow called Adams, who was much distressed. The cook, the maids, and old Gregory the gardener. Holmes questioned each with a light and easy manner, seeming to gossip rather than interrogate, and I marveled, as I had so often done, at the ease with which he drew from people things they did not know they were telling him. From Adams, the valet, we learned that his master had been in a strange and excited state the last days of his life, that on the Sunday before his death he had received a visitor, a gentleman from London who came unannounced and closeted himself with Julian for above an hour, and departed without giving his name. That after this visit Julian had been not himself, at times elated, at times sunk in gloom, and that on the Monday I marked, Julian had gone. Soiled with what, do you recall? Asked Holmes carelessly. A reddish sort of mud, sir. I remember it because it don't come off easy, and it ain't the mud we get hereabouts. I had to work at his boots a good half-hour. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. And on Tuesday, said Holmes, your master dined with Sir Marcus and afterward retired to write letters. You saw him on Tuesday. The young man hesitated. Yes, sir. That is, I saw him at dinner time, when I laid out his evening things. After that he said he'd not need me, and I was to go to bed early, as he'd be up late riding. So I didn't see him again, not until they found him. He dismissed you early on Tuesday evening. Was that his custom? No, sir. He mostly liked me to sit up for him. But that night he was particular that I should go to bed. Most instructive, murmured Holmes when the valet had gone. You perceive the shape of it, Watson. If your medical opinion is correct, and Julian died on Monday, then on Tuesday someone required that the household believe him alive, and that no one who knew him well should observe him too closely. The valet, who dresses a man and knows his every feature, was sent to bed early. Sir Marcus dined with someone. A man got up to resemble his nephew in his nephew's clothes, seen across a dinner table by candlelight by an old man of failing sight. For you will have noticed that Sir Marcus wears spectacles and holds all he reads at arm's length. It need not have been a perfect resemblance. It needed only to suffice for one evening, at one table, with one grieving old man who had no reason to doubt. But to what end? To fix the time of death upon Tuesday night, and to associate it with that letter and that appointed meeting. Consider, if Julian died on Monday, then his movements on Monday, that mysterious journey over the red clay, become the heart of the matter. But if he is believed to have died on Tuesday night, keeping a secret assignation in the tower with a lady, then all suspicion is directed toward that lady and that midnight tryst, and Monday is forgotten. The whole elaborate fiction of the locked room, the unsent letter, the dinner impostor, serves one purpose: to move the crime forward by a day and sideways, from a matter of London and red clay to a matter of a jilted or desperate woman in a lonely tower. We are meant to suspect Miss Vane, which is the surest possible sign, Watson, that Miss Vane is innocent. We drove that afternoon to Vane Court, the neighboring estate. It was a smaller and shabbier place than Fenwick Hall, the house handsome but ill-kept, with an air of gentility straining against reduced means. We were received by Mr. Aldous Vane, the father, a florid, hardy gentleman of expansive manners, whose joviality seemed to me a shade too determined, and presently by his daughter. Miss Eleanor Vane was a young woman of remarkable beauty, and I thought, of unusual strength of character. She was perhaps 22, dark-eyed and pale, and she bore herself with a composure that cost her visibly a great effort, for it was plain she had wept much. She met Holmes's gaze steadily. "You have come about Julian," she said before Holmes could speak. "I will tell you whatever I can, Mr. Holmes. I have nothing to conceal, though I know how it must look. He wrote to me, I know he wrote to me, for I received his letter." Holmes leaned forward. "You received a letter? On what day and by what means?" "By the last post on Tuesday. It was in his hand, asking me to meet him at the Tower at 11 that night, and saying he had discovered something that concerned us both." She pressed her handkerchief to her lips. "But Mr. Holmes, I did not go. I could not. My father was unwell that night, and I sat with him until past midnight, and the maid, Susan, can tell you I never left the house. I did not go. And now they say Julian is dead in that dreadful place, and I never went to him." Her composure broke at last, and she wept. Holmes waited with his grave courtesy until she had recovered herself. "Miss Vane, the letter you received, do you have it still?" "I burned it," she said. "He asked me to tell no one, and I was afraid. I thought no good could come of such a letter being found. I know now how foolish that was. You need not reproach yourself. Tell me the letter you received, was it complete?" "A whole letter, signed and sent." "Why, yes, of course. A whole letter." "That is very interesting," said Holmes, "for the letter found upon the desk in the Tower is unfinished, breaking off in the middle of a sentence, and it was never sent. You received a complete letter through the post. There lies in the Tower an incomplete one that was never posted. There were then 2 letters." He turned the matter over in his mind. "Miss Vane, you spoke of something Julian had told you. His letter says what you told me on Sunday has changed everything." "What did you tell him on Sunday?" The young lady colored deeply and glanced toward the door through which her father had withdrawn. "It was a private matter, Mr. Holmes." "Miss Vane," said Holmes gently, "a man is dead, and unless I learn the truth, an innocent person may hang for it, very possibly yourself. I must ask you to trust me. What did you tell him on Sunday?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, she said, "I told him that I had overheard my father, some nights before, in conversation with a stranger, a rough-spoken man from London. They did not know I was near. My father was in great distress, speaking of debts, of ruin, of some paper he had signed that could destroy him. And the stranger said, he said that Sir Marcus Thorne's fortune would set all right, if only there were no heir between." She raised her stricken eyes to Holmes. "I did not understand it then. I told Julian only that I feared my father was in the power of some evil man, and that our marriage might be forbidden, for my father wished me to marry someone else. Someone with money. I told Julian because I was frightened, and he was the only soul I could trust. I never dreamed," she could not go on. Holmes rose. His face had that keen, still look that meant the pieces were falling into their places. "You have been very brave, Miss Vane, and very honest, and you have done more to save yourself than 100 protestations could have done. I have but one further question. This gentleman your father wished you to marry, this man of money. What is his name? His name is Mr. Silas Grady, she said. He was a partner of my father's in some venture. He came often to the house this autumn. I could not bear him. A partner from London. From London, yes. Thank you, said Holmes. You have given me the last thread I required. Say nothing of this conversation to anyone, not to your father, above all not to your father. Trust me a little longer, and I believe I may bring you out of this shadow entirely. As we drove back through the gathering dusk, Holmes was more animated than I had seen him in weeks. Now the thing takes form, Watson. Consider what we have gathered. Julian Thorne was heir to a great fortune. Miss Vane's father, Aldous Vane, is a ruined man in the grip of a London sharper named Silas Grady. The same Grady, I do not doubt, who called unannounced upon Julian the Sunday before his death, and who is the mysterious visitor Adams described. Vane's daughter has told her lover that her father is desperate, and that a marriage to a moneyed man is being pressed upon her. And there is talk, overheard, of Sir Marcus's fortune, and of an heir that stands between certain persons and that fortune. Julian was that heir. So the motive is the inheritance. The inheritance is at the root of it, but the branches are more tangled than that. Mark the visit of Grady to Julian on Sunday. Why should a London moneylender call upon the young heir? And mark that after that visit Julian was not himself, by turns elated and cast down, and that on Monday he made a secret journey to a place of red clay and returned soiled and out of temper. He had discovered something. His unfinished letter says as much. I have discovered something that concerns us both more nearly than you can imagine. Julian was not merely a victim, Watson. He was upon the track of something. He had learned a secret, and that secret cost him his life. But what secret? And who killed him, Grady? Vane. Let us not run ahead of our evidence. There is a piece still wanting, and it lies, I fancy, in London upon that red clay. I have telegraphed already to Lestrade and to certain other sources. But there is one experiment I wish to make before we sleep. That greasy matter beneath the dead man's nails. I have examined it under the microscope this afternoon, and I can tell you what it is. It is a mixture of lampblack and oil, such as is used in the composition of certain printers' inks, and, Watson, such as is used by engravers and by those who prepare printing plates. Julian had, shortly before his death, handled a printing plate, or something inked from one. Now, what should a gentleman of leisure have to do with printing plates? I confessed I could not imagine, nor could I until I set it beside the rest. But I begin to see. Tomorrow, Watson, I must go to London. I would ask you to remain here, keep your eyes open, and above all watch over the safety of Miss Vane and of Sir Marcus. There is a cold and clever intelligence at work in this affair, and it has already killed once to protect its designs. It will not scruple to kill again if it feels itself threatened. Holmes departed by the early train, and I passed an anxious day at Fenwick Hall. Sir Marcus was sunk in a heavy melancholy, sitting long hours before the fire and speaking little. I took occasion to observe him closely, mindful of Holmes's remark upon his failing eyesight, and I confirmed that the old gentleman was indeed very short of sight, wearing thick spectacles and holding his newspaper close against his nose. It was entirely credible that he might have dined across a candle-lit table with an impostor and suspected nothing, if the impostor were of the right build and coloring and kept his distance. In the afternoon a caller came to the hall, a large, smooth-faced man of perhaps 40, expensively but flashily dressed, with small, quick eyes and a manner of oily deference that I found instantly repugnant. He gave his name as Mr. Silas Grady, and asked to see Sir Marcus upon. a matter of business touching the late Mr. Julian. I contrived to remain in the room, upon the pretext of my medical attendance on Sir Marcus, and I watched the fellow narrowly. He expressed the most fulsome condolences, spoke of himself as a man of affairs who had had certain dealings with the young gentleman, and delicately raised the question of monies owed. Julian, it seemed, had borrowed of him, a matter of some hundreds of pounds, and Grady, with many protestations of reluctance, wished to know whether the estate would honor the debt. It was smoothly done, and yet there was something in his eyes as they roved about the room, in the way he studied Sir Marcus's grief-worn face, that put me powerfully in mind of a jackal at a carcass. When he had gone, I made a careful note of the interview to lay before Holmes. Holmes returned by the last train, travel-stained and weary but with the light of triumph in his eye. He listened to my account of Grady's visit with the keenest attention. "He grows bold," said Holmes. "He comes to test the ground, to learn how much is suspected. Excellent, a nervous criminal makes mistakes. And I, Watson, have not been idle. Let me tell you what I have found, for the affair is nearly complete, and it is a darker and a subtler thing than even I had supposed." He warmed his hands at the fire and began. "You recall the red clay upon Julian's boots, and the printer's ink beneath his nails. I set myself in London to discover where a man might acquire both in a single day's journey. There is such a place, a district by the river below Dipped Ford, where the clay is of that reddish character, and where, among the wharves and warehouses, are certain small and secret printing establishments. I made inquiries backed by Lestrade's authority, and I traced our Mr. Silas Grady to a warehouse in that quarter. And what do you suppose was found within it, when the police forced the doors this afternoon? I cannot guess. A printing press, Watson, of the finest workmanship, and a quantity of paper of a peculiar make, and the plates, the copper plates, from which had been struck a great number of forged banknotes and forged bills of exchange. Silas Grady is the head of one of the most dangerous coining and forging gangs in the south of England. Vane, the ruined gentleman, had fallen into his clutches, had signed, no doubt, some forged paper under Grady's direction, and was thereafter Grady's creature, to be used as a respectable front and a means of access to county society. And Grady's grand design, Watson, was nothing less than the plundering of the Thorne fortune. Through Vane, he meant to marry the beautiful Eleanor to a confederate, or to himself, and through some further forgery, forged bonds, a forged will, who knows, to lay hands upon Sir Marcus's wealth. But between him and that wealth stood one obstacle, Julian Thorne, the heir. And Julian discovered the forgery. When Grady called upon him that Sunday, it was, I think, to sound him, perhaps to attempt to draw him into the scheme, perhaps to threaten. Grady may have believed the wild young heir, with his debts and his loose ways, might be bought or corrupted. But Julian, whatever his faults, was no criminal, and he was in love with Vane's daughter. Alarmed by what Grady let fall, and by what Eleanor had told him of her father's plight, he went on Monday down to that riverside quarter. I have found a waterman who ferried a young gentleman of his description across the reach that very day, and there, I do not doubt, he penetrated to the very warehouse, saw the press, handled a plate, hence the ink beneath his nails, and came away possessed of proof that could send Silas Grady and all his gang to penal servitude. That is the secret that cost him his life. He returned soiled and out of temper, because he had seen the abyss into which his sweetheart's father had fallen. And that night or the next day, he confronted someone or was intercepted, and he was killed to seal his lips. Then Grady is the murderer. Holmes was silent for a moment, and a curious expression crossed his face. Grady is a forger, a coiner, and a scoundrel who richly deserves the rope. And yet, Watson, I am not perfectly satisfied that Grady killed Julian Thorne with his own hand. There are elements in the manner of the killing that do not fit him. Consider, the murder was done at Fenwick Hall, in a tower to which there was but one key, kept in Sir Marcus's own study. It required intimate knowledge of the house, of the key's whereabouts, of the tower's history, of Julian's habits, of Sir Marcus's poor eyesight, of the very existence of the letter to Alina. Grady is a stranger to the hall. He could not have known these things. The impostor at Tuesday's dinner must have been someone who could pass, at least at a candle-lit distance, for a member of the household or a guest, and who could come and go at the hall without exciting remark. And the locked-room trick, that is the work of a cool and deliberate mind, working unhurried and secure upon its own ground. No, Watson. There was a hand within the hall. There was a traitor at Fenwick. I stared at him, but who? The steward. The valet. Let us reason it through. Who within that household had knowledge, opportunity, and motive? And who, above all, benefits by the death of Julian Thorne? He fixed me with his keen glance. There is one person we have scarcely considered, because grief has placed him above suspicion. But grief, Watson, is the easiest of all things to counterfeit, and the most convenient of all shields. Ask yourself, with Julian dead and no other heir who inherits the Thorne fortune, why, I suppose it reverts to Sir Marcus, and thence. Sir Marcus is old, and by his own account has no family remaining. But is that so? I made inquiries in London upon another head besides the forgery. Sir Marcus Thorne had a brother, Julian's father, long dead. But he had also a sister, who married beneath her and was cast off by the family many years ago, and who died in poverty. That sister left a son, and that son, Watson, after a youth spent in obscurity, presented himself at Fenwick Hall some 3 years ago, and was taken in by his uncle as a dependent and man of affairs. He manages the estate's accounts. He has the run of the house. He knows every key upon every board. And upon the death of Julian, he stands next in blood to the whole inheritance. The steward Hollies. Hollies has served the family too long to be that man, and is besides too old. No, Watson, think. Who did we meet, grave and correct, who has been at Sir Marcus's side throughout, whom no one thinks to question? He shook his head. But I run ahead of my proof. I do not yet know the man's face, only his place in the design. Tomorrow all shall be made plain. I have set a trap, and I think our quarry will walk into it. But tonight, Watson, we must be watchful, for a cornered animal is most dangerous, and I fear our murderer knows that the ground is shifting beneath him. I have said that grief may be counterfeited, and it was with a new and uneasy eye that I regarded the household of Fenwick Hall the following morning. Holmes had risen before dawn and gone out. He would say nothing of his purpose, only that I should hold myself in readiness and keep my revolver by me. The day was dark and threatening, with a leaden sky that promised snow, and a wind that had risen in the night and now moaned about the old gables like a thing in pain. It was toward noon that Holmes gathered us together in the great drawing-room of the hall. He had sent word that all should be present, and I looked with fresh attention upon the company assembled there. Sir Marcus sat in his great chair by the fire, worn and gray. Near him stood Inspector Bramwell, and with him a sharp-faced man I did not know, whom Holmes presented briefly as Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, come down that morning. Miss Alina Vane was there, pale and composed, and her father, Aldous Vane, who seemed to have shrunk and aged since our visit, and who could not keep his eyes still. The steward Holly stood by the door. And there was one other, a man of perhaps 35, quietly and correctly dressed, with a smooth, pale, intelligent face and dark hair, who stood a little apart at Sir Marcus's shoulder, and whom I now recalled having seen once or twice about the house without ever learning his name. He had a still, watchful quality, and hands that were never quite at rest. "I have asked you all to come," said Holmes, standing before the fire with his hands behind his back, "because the death of Julian Thorne is no longer a mystery to me, and I believe those most nearly concerned have a right to hear the truth. It is a painful truth, and I shall not spare it, for a young man has been murdered, and an innocent lady has lain under a monstrous suspicion, and both those wrongs must be set right." A stir went round the room. Sir Marcus raised his haggard face. "Julian Thorne," Holmes continued, "did not die on Tuesday night, as we were meant to believe. He died on Monday, some 30 hours earlier. Dr. Watson's examination of the body established it, and everything that has followed confirms it. On Monday, Julian made a secret journey to a warehouse by the Thames at Deptford, where he discovered a criminal enterprise of the gravest kind. A manufactory of forged banknotes and bills, the head of which is a man now in the hands of the police." Holmes glanced toward Aldous Vane, who had gone the color of ashes. "Julian came away with proof of that forgery, and with knowledge that certain persons of his acquaintance were entangled in it. That knowledge was his death warrant, for the men behind the forgery could not permit him to live and speak. Then it was these forgers who killed him," said Bramwell. "Forgery gave the motive," said Holmes, "but the murder was done by a hand within this house, by one who knew its every secret, who had access to the one key of the tower, who knew of Julian's love for Miss Vane and could counterfeit his hand well enough to write a letter luring her in appearance to a midnight meeting, who could pass a candle-lit dinner before an uncle of failing sight for the dead man himself and so remove the time of death by a day, and who, above all." The silence in that room was absolute. I saw the pale man at Sir Marcus's shoulder standing very still, his hands at last quite motionless. "Sir Marcus," said Holmes quietly, "will you tell these gentlemen the name of your sister's son, who came to you 3 years ago and who manages your affairs?" Sir Marcus looked up, bewildered. You mean Stephen. Stephen Corliss, my sister Margaret's boy. But, Mr. Holmes, you cannot suspect Stephen. He has been a son to me since Julian." He stopped, and a look of dawning horror came into his aged face. "Since Julian died," Holmes finished for him softly. "Yes, Mr. Stephen Corliss, I must ask you to explain how a jet button from a lady's evening glove, a glove I have this morning matched to a pair sold last month in Tunbridge Wells to a gentleman answering your description, purchased, the shopman recalls, as a gift, came to be lying upon the floor of the observatory beside the body of your cousin." For a moment no one moved. Then Stephen Corliss did a thing that betrayed him more surely than any word. He turned, with the swift and silent motion of a cat, toward the long window at the end of the room. But Holmes had foreseen it. Lestrade and Bramwell were upon him before he had taken 2 steps, and though he struggled with a sudden and shocking ferocity, quite unlike his cool exterior, they bore him down and the handcuffs clicked upon his wrists. Even then his pale face remained composed, save for the eyes, which burned with a cold and desperate fire. "You have no proof," he said in a voice of ice. "A button. A resemblance. It is nothing." "It is a great deal," said Holmes, "and there is more. But you shall hear it all, as these others shall, for I have promised the truth." He turned to the company, while the prisoner stood breathing hard between his captors. "Let me lay the whole matter before you as it unfolded. Stephen Corliss was the son of Sir Marcus's disowned sister, raised in poverty and bitterness, nursing all his life the sense of having been robbed of his birthright. 3 years ago he came to Fenwick Hall and won his way, by patience and address, into his uncle's confidence and household. But between him and the fortune he coveted stood Julian, the acknowledged heir, the favored nephew. Corliss bided his time. And then, this autumn, opportunity came to him in the person of Silas Grady." "How came Corliss to know Grady?" I asked. "That I learned in London. Corliss, before he came to the Hall, had lived on the fringes of the criminal world, had done clerical work indeed, for men not unlike Grady. When Grady's gang extended its operations into this county and drew Aldous Vane into its web as a genteel front, Corliss recognized in Grady an old and dangerous acquaintance, and saw at once how the 2 men's interests might be made to serve his own. Here is the subtlety of it and the horror. Grady wished Julian dead, because Julian had stumbled on the forgery. Corliss wished Julian dead, because Julian stood between him and the fortune. Two men, two motives, one victim. They made their bargain. Grady's gang would supply the pressure and, if need be, the muscle. But the murder itself must be done within the hall, by the one man who had the knowledge to do it and make it appear a thing apart. A lover's tragedy, a woman's crime, anything but what it was. But why the tower? Cried Sir Marcus. Why that dreadful, elaborate mummery? Because a simple murder invites simple questions, and the first of those questions is always, who profits? Corliss profited more than any man alive by Julian's death, and he knew it. He dared not let the crime appear as murder at all, still less as murder for gain. So he constructed a labyrinth. Julian, having discovered the forgery on Monday, was lured, I think by Corliss himself, under some pretext of urgent and confidential news, to the Observatory on Monday evening. There, at the foot of the iron stair, Corliss struck him down from behind. That was the true murder, done on Monday in that cold and secret place where no cry would be heard. Holmes paused, and his voice grew graver still. But a body cannot lie undiscovered forever, and a death on Monday, following hard upon Julian's dangerous journey to Deptford, might point too plainly toward the forgery, and thence, perhaps, toward Corliss's own confederates and himself. So the crime must be disguised in time and in nature. Corliss forged a letter in Julian's hand. He had the run of Julian's papers and had studied the hand at leisure, and posted it to Miss Vane, appointing a meeting at the Tower for 11 o'clock on Tuesday night. A second, unfinished copy of such a letter he left upon the desk in the Tower, that it might be found beside the body. Thus the crime was made to appear to happen on Tuesday night, at a clandestine tryst, and the whole current of suspicion was turned toward Miss Vane. Eleanor Vane gave a low cry, and I saw her sway. I moved to steady her, but she recovered herself and stood erect, her eyes fixed upon the prisoner with a look I shall not forget. To complete the illusion, Holmes went on, the time of death had to be fixed at Tuesday night in the minds of all the household. And so, on Tuesday evening, a man dined with Sir Marcus in Julian's place. I believe it was Corliss himself, or a confederate of Grady's of similar build, got up in Julian's clothes, keeping his distance, speaking little, trading upon Sir Marcus's short sight, and upon the natural reluctance of an uncle to peer too closely at a nephew across his own table. The valet, who might have detected the fraud in an instant, was sent early to bed. After that dinner, the impostor slipped away, and Julian's already dead body, which had lain concealed since Monday, preserved by the bitter cold that Corliss counted upon, was carried up to the Tower and arranged at the foot of the stair, as though he had fallen and struck his head. But he arranged it wrongly, said I. He arranged it wrongly, Holmes agreed. In dragging the body into position, he laid it with the head toward the stair, forgetting that a man falling backward down that stair must come to rest with his head away from it. It was a small error, made in the dark and in haste, but it was the first thread I seized upon, for it proved the body had been placed, not fallen. Then Corliss withdrew, closed the great oaken door, left the key in the lock upon the inner side, and turned it from without by the old trick of the loop and wire, leaving those fine scratches upon the mechanism which I found. He created his sealed room, that we might marvel at a locked door and forget to ask the plainer questions. And there was one thing more. The letter to Miss Vane spoke of 11 o'clock, and Corliss took care, I do not doubt, to be seen about the hall at that hour, wearing an air of unconcern, so that when the alarm came he should seem as innocent as any. The button, said Lestrade. You spoke of the button. The single flaw in an almost flawless design. Corliss, to bind Miss Vane still more firmly to the crime, meant to leave some token of her presence in the Tower. He had bought, a month before, a pair of ladies' evening gloves, bought them. The Tunbridge shopman will testify himself. From one of these, he had cut a jet button, meaning to drop it beside the body as proof that a woman had been present. And drop it he did, but in the darkness it rolled from where he intended, into the dust at the foot of the far wall, 15 feet from the body, where it lay clean and conspicuous among the dust of years, and where I found it. Had it lain by the body as he intended, it might have damned Miss Vane. Lying where it did, clean amid ancient dust, it told me only that someone had entered that room very recently and dropped it, someone who wished us to believe a woman had been there. The excess of cunning was its own undoing, as excessive cunning so often is. Stephen Corliss had listened to all this without a word, his composure returning as he saw that flight was impossible. When Holmes had done, he lifted his head and looked about the room with a cold contempt that was more dreadful than any outburst. "Very ingenious, Mr. Holmes," said he. "You have built a great deal upon a button and a corpse's posture. But I say again, where is your proof? A jury wants more than a clever tale." "You are right," said Holmes, "and I have more. When you dragged your cousin's body up to the tower, you took care to remove from his pockets everything that might connect him with Diptford and the forgery. For that connection, followed up, might have led to your confederates and so to you. But you did not know, Mr. Corliss, that on the Monday before he died, Julian had already posted from Diptford a letter to a friend at his club in London, enclosing a single forged £5 note as evidence, and describing what he had seen and where. I recovered that letter yesterday. It is in Lestrade's hands. It fixes Julian's discovery upon Monday, names the warehouse, and speaks, mark this, of his intention to confront my cousin C, in whom I fear I have been cruelly deceived, for I have learned he is hand in glove with these very rogues. Julian had discovered your part in it, Corliss, before he died. He named you, and you killed him before he could speak. That letter with Grady's press, with the forged note, with the glove and the button and the scratches upon the lock, will be proof enough for any jury in England." At those words, the last of Corliss's icy composure broke. His face worked horribly, and he uttered a torrent of such bitter and blasphemous reproach against the dead man, against his uncle, against the fate that had cheated him, that the ladies were hurried from the room. He was led away raving between the two inspectors, and I confess I was glad to see the back of him, for there had been in that cold, clever, envenomed face a glimpse of something that chilled me more than the December wind. Aldous Vane, broken and weeping, made a full confession of his own part, how he had signed, in a moment of desperation over gambling debts, a paper that proved to be forged, and had thereafter been Grady's helpless tool, though he swore, and I believe truly that he had known nothing of the murder and would have died rather than see his daughter accused. His fate rested with the courts, but Holmes, moved by the man's genuine remorse and by his daughter's anguish, undertook to speak for him, and in the end, having turned King's evidence against Grady, he escaped with a lighter sentence than his folly had merited. It was late that evening, when the officers had gone with their prisoners, and a heavy snow had begun at last to fall, veiling the grim tower upon the hill in a soft and merciful white, that Sir Marcus Thorne came to us where we sat before the fire. The old man was utterly broken. He had lost, in the space of a week, his heir, his fortune's piece, and the nephew he had trusted as a son. "I do not know how to thank you, Mr. Holmes," said he, in a voice scarce above a whisper. "You have given me back the truth, though God knows it is a bitter gift. Julian, poor Julian, I thought him careless and weak. And all the time he had gone alone into that den of thieves, and had learned the truth, and meant to save that poor girl's father, and died for it. He was a better man than I knew." "He was a brave one," said Holmes gently, "and he died in the act of doing right. There are worse epitaphs, Sir Marcus. Do not let the manner of his death poison the memory of it. He is cleared of every shadow. He was no fool duped by a woman, no victim of a squalid intrigue. He was a young man who found evil and would not turn from it. Miss Vane, I think, will always remember him so, and she is worth the remembering by." Sir Marcus bowed his head, and we left him with his grief and his gardener's lantern gleaming faintly through the falling snow, and drove down through the white and silent night to catch the last train to town. We spoke little on the journey. The affair had touched us both more nearly than most, for there had been in it not the mere ingenuity of crime, but a deep and tragic waste. Of youth, of trust, of the natural affections between kinsmen turned to poison by envy and greed. It was Holmes who broke the silence at last, as the lights of London began to glitter through the whirling snow beyond the carriage window. "It is a curious reflection, Watson," said he, "that our murderer's whole downfall lay in his very cleverness. Had Corliss simply struck his cousin down and fled, or made it a plain robbery, he might have puzzled the county police for a month and gone unhanged. But he could not resist the elaborate, the locked door, the false letter, the dinner impostor, the planted button. Each device was a stroke of real ingenuity, and each device left its trace, and every trace led back to a mind that knew the house, the family, the habits, and the sight of an old man's eyes. He built a labyrinth to hide himself, and in the building of it he wrote his name upon every wall. The plain crime conceals the criminal. It is the ingenious crime that betrays him." "And yet," said I, "you very nearly admired the ingenuity." He smiled, that rare and fleeting smile of his, and gazed out at the falling snow. "One may admire the intricacy of a spider's web, Watson, and still be glad to sweep it from the corner. There was a fine intelligence in Stephen Corliss, a very fine intelligence turned wholly to evil ends. That perhaps is the saddest thing in the whole affair. Not the wickedness of a stupid man, but the waste of a clever one. He might have been anything. He chose to be a murderer, out of envy of a cousin who wished him nothing but good. There is a lesson in it somewhere, though I am too tired tonight to draw it." He said no more, and I did not press him. The train bore us on through the darkness toward Baker Street, and behind us, upon the frozen crown of the Kentish Downs, the abandoned observatory kept its silent vigil beneath the snow, its work of witness done, its dead avenged, and its long-kept secret at last given up to the light.